Hey everyone, Car Cafe here with some more set 5 goodness. Here to talk about the big scary boogeyman, the Varga Rakshasa, here in his SCR Secret Rare Glory. I did mention last video that we pulled a secret, and this is the one I got. And you'll see in the rest of this deck profile, this was not the only high rarity Varga Rakshasa that I pulled. I kind of made out a bandit on this side, so pretty happy about that. Wouldn't have rather had the secret odium, but you know, we still got a secret, so that's pretty cool. This deck is very strong. Varga hasn't gone anywhere. It's been around as one of the stronger decks in the meta since it first came out in the first set of Design Z, and this now final form question mark of him definitely just really solidifies this deck as one of the best decks in the format right now, and probably will be for a long time. So let's talk about it. First up, ride line is basically the same, with the one addition of the Virgilla grade 1, but as always, you know, when you're riding onto the grade 0 going second, you draw a card. This card says that when you would ride from your ride deck, instead of discarding 1 for the cost, you can Soul Blast 1 instead. So I was going back and forth for a long time. I tried to hold on to the original Varga grade 1 ride line for a long time, just because I really like that extra rear guard to be able to push a little bit harder on turn 2. But it just became more and more prevalent that being able to save the card on turn 2 and not have to discard something was just too valuable, because a lot of the time you're either having to throw shield away or pieces that you need that you weren't going to get back. So I switched card hand sizes, everything in this game, so I came around. That's what we're doing. Boulder Ax is still Boulder Ax. You know, when you ride on top of him with Varga, he pops himself out of the soul, and then on attack he gets 5k, retires himself, draws a card. Great card. And then you do run a 1 copy of base Varga in the ride line still, which we'll talk about why when we go over Rakshasa in a second. For anyone who doesn't know what base Varga does, just real quick recap is when he attacks a Vanguard, you counterblast 1, retire everyone's front row, yours and your opponent's. He gets 10,000 power, and at the end of that battle, he restands with -2 drives. And then his divine skill is at the end of the battle that he attacked. The second battle specifically, if your opponent is at 4 more damage, you can counterblast 1 again. He restands himself again and gets +2 drives. So you get 3 Vanguard swings. Essentially, you get to attack first, twin drive, attack, and again, no drives, attack a third time, twin drive. So very strong card. That's why it's been around for such a long time. And you still run him in the ride line. That's because we need to talk about our very shiny boy. There's one little sad regular one out here on the side. But then we got the secret, the FFR, and the SR. So can't really complain there at all about these pulls. Like, my God, this is definitely the best I've ever done out of our case splits that we do with my friend group. But all right, so there's a lot of text on this card. What does he do? What does he say? Let's go through it. So first and foremost is that when he's placed from riding on top of a Varga with a different name or a card in the Maulworm state, he becomes in the Maulworm state for the rest of the fight. It's a kind of pointless text. I don't know why this is here, but this is why you're required to run OG Varga, because he specifically needs to ride on top of a Varga with a different name for it to activate in the first place. Because that second line of text, as you heard, specifically says a Maulworm that is a unit already in the Maulworm state. So the only way you can get into it is by riding the old one. And then when you do that, if you had not Persona Rode yet, you get Persona Ride. So you don't lose a turn of Persona Ride on turn 4 when you would ride this. You still get Persona Ride. So that's really strong in and of itself. But then his main effect is essentially an upgraded version of Varga's original main effect, which is at the end of the battle that he attacked, if it's in the Malworm state, for free, you retire everybody's front row, and this gets 10,000 power. Then at the end of the battle, you counterblast 1, retire everyone's back row, restand -2 drives. So now he board wipes, and the front row retire is free. So even if someone tries to damage deny you, you will still get the 10k in the front row wipe, which is very good against certain decks. And what's even better is now with the counterblast, you're taking out their whole board. So some decks, that's a huge problem. A lot of decks struggle to be able to maintain a board like that. They just can't consistently rebuild it every turn over and over again. So the ability to just consistently wipe your opponent's board is definitely very strong. But then the other upgrade this card got is this unit's Divine Skill, which is at the end of the battle, this unit attacked. If you have already stood by this card effect, your audio ability, you counterblast 1, stand, and he gets +2 drives. So you'll notice that there's no grade restriction. It's essentially the exact same Divine Skill as the original, but you no longer have to wait for your opponent to be at 4 damage. You can now just do it immediately. So that play around option your opponent used to have a Varga of just staying at low damage and making sure they didn't go to 4 damage till the right time no longer matters. You can now just go into the Divine Skill and that 3rd Vanguard swing the second you want to. So just a straight upgrade from the original Varga, wipe their board, do the triple restand whenever you want. Just a very, very strong card. I will say not the most original changes, it's just the original Varga with upgrades. Didn't really change all that much, which I guess makes sense. But I guess I was hoping for maybe to do a little bit more that was different. But better is better, and you can't really argue with that. For the rest of our grade 3s, we are running 3 copies of Twin Pulse Dragon. This is a card that came out in set 4. This is a very good card. What he says is when it's placed on rear guard, if you have grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Varga in its name, so you can use it with either Varga, doesn't matter which one. You Energy Blast 3, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, call 1 to the board. It's not once per turn either. So if you find another copy of him off the top, and oh no, sorry, it has to be grade 2 or less. My bad, I keep getting that mixed up. Yeah. So it's Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5, call a grade 2 or less card to the rear guard, shuffle your deck. So you can't call another copy of him. But it is still a searcher. The deck didn't have a way of filtering your deck or shuffling, so that's really good. And for Energy Blast 3, which honestly just good, it doesn't cost Counterblast because you don't really have the Counterblast to be affording. The energy makes things a little tight on the energy side. That's why we're only running 3. But it's not too bad, you just have to manage it well. His second effect is also pretty good, which is that when this is retired from your front row circle, if your opponent's Vanguard is at grade 3, you choose one of your Vanguards and it gets 5k, as long as it's Varga. So when Varga wipes out the front row, this just gives it a little nice power boost, which is nice. So now Varga's hitting for better numbers. Instead of hitting for 23, it's hitting for 28, 38 on a Persona Ride turn. Makes it harder to stop. So we like that skill a lot. Simple, but very effective. Next, I am still running 2 of the Glaive Dragon. This was a card that came out with Varga back at the beginning of Divine Z. And still a good card. I think you're definitely worthy of running 2. So this unit has 2 effects, and they're both very impactful. The first one is that during your turn, as long as you don't have another copy of him in the front row, he gets 10,000 power and cannot be retired by your card effects. So this doesn't get retired by Varga, which is very good if you want to make sure you have another standing rear guard after you've done all your Vanguard swings. This is a great way to do that. But on top of that, he also has a second continuous effect, which is that as long as you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Varga in its name, this card gets boost. So this card makes really good numbers behind your grade 2 rear guards. So it'll just be behind them. It's not getting the 10k buff from its other effect because that has to be in the front row, but it's still a 13k booster. So that just helps make really good numbers. So in the front row, back row, doesn't really matter. He can be very versatile. And then also you having one in the front and one in the back doesn't affect that first effect to be able to be not retired and get 10k. That only specifies he can't have another copy of him in the front row. If you have one in the back, that skill's live. And lastly, to round out the grade 3s, we have Caliburn as our Regalis piece of choice. This card is very good. Very simple. In fact, we talked about it a couple times. Real quick, what it does is when you play it as a normal order, you can do one of the following. You can either put it in the drop zone and draw 2, or you can put it into the soul and countercharge 1. A lot of the times you're using it for that second effect because countercharge is very important. You have a good amount of counterblast because Varga is counterblasting 1 or twice a turn, depending on if you're going for the divine skill. You have other rear guards that are going to be counterblasting, so making sure you have that open CB is very important. So that's why we like Caliburn in this deck. Though sometimes if you get like pushed to high damage, depending on what you're playing against, you might just go for the draw 2 because you already have all the CB. Next, for the grade 2, some familiar faces. We are still running 3 copies of Shur. This is another card from OG set 1 of Divine Z, because this is also a very good card. Real quick as a recap for what she does, she has a couple skills. The first is that when she attacks, you can Energy Blast 2. She gets 5,000 power, and you get to pick another rear guard, and then it gets the red text skill that when it would be retired during your turn, you put it back in your hand instead of going to the drop zone. So this is really good for Varga's effect of wiping out your whole board, that this is a way of putting something like an important piece that you really want to use again next turn back into your hand. So very good skill. We love it for that, and Energy Blast 2 is pretty cheap. She is competing a little bit with the Impulsive Dragon, but because it's Energy Blast 2, at least it's a little bit better. Then her second effect is your multi-attack enabler. So essentially it's when she specifically is retired, you can counterblast 1, and she gets called back with 10,000 power. So able to chain a lot of attacks together with her, and able to hopefully just close the game out when you do. So we're only running 3 now because energy is a little tighter. Counterblast is still pretty tight. Depending on what your setup is, it just doesn't make sense to use her, or you just don't have the CB to afford her. So 4 can get a little too cloggy and have too many for her, but I find 3 is a good number, especially because you have Impulsive Dragon to just be able to search these out when you need them. Next, similar logics as to why we're only running 3, but we're running 3 Energy Cycler and Foulheart. Same energy cycler that every nation has. So when you discard it or guard with it during the ride phase or guardian step, you can Energy Blast 3 or Counter Blast 1 to draw a card. It's a great little skill there. But then the nation specific effect that this card has for the Persona Ride turn is when it's placed on rear guard, if you Persona Road, Counter Blast 1 or Soul Blast, or Energy Blast 3, excuse me, and you get to call grade 1 from the drop zone back to the board. That's very good in this deck because you have a lot of grade 1s that are very good with really strong skills that often will end up in the drop zone for their own skills, if not from Varga just wiping them off the board. So this is a great way to get some of those resources back. But again, you're now fighting energy pretty hard with some other cards and CB, so 3 copies. And I am running 1 extra copy of Boulder Ax in the deck still, just because he's a good early game attacker to just throw down on turn 2, try and put on some pressure. Plus, he's just a good attacker later as well because he retires himself off the board to net a card into your hand as in a 15k beater. So I like that. So I like keeping one of them around just to have a couple that I can play with. Lastly, I am still running 2 Defensing Roar. This card is incredibly strong and really helps you survive and not die. So what this card says is it's a blitz order that says when this is placed, you can choose a card that does not have a sentinel, that is not a sentinel on your guardian circle, and it gets the text that when it would be retired from the guardian circle, put it back into your hand. So essentially, if you guard with like a 15k shield first and then throw this down, you can put that 15k shield back into your hand after you guard with it. So you're able to recycle it and use it more to guard. Very good card, really good at keeping you alive. No, you can't recycle perfect guards, but that's okay. The 15k shields are your main target for what you're looking to put back into your hand. Or an energy cycler if you guarded with that. So it can be very versatile. You can even use it to cycle the OT if you were unlucky enough to draw the OT. You can throw this down and use a 50k shield twice, which can be very good at keeping you alive. But now let's talk about the myriad of great ones we have, starting about the new boy, 3 copies of the Storm Chaser Dragon. So, Storm Chaser Dragon is a new card that just came out with Rakshasa. This card is pretty good. It's an interesting card. He's got 2 effects. The first is that when it's retired from rearguard by the ability of your grade 3 or greater with Varga in its name, you may call it back to the rearguard in the back row at rest. But if you Soul Blast 1, your Vanguard is in the Malworm state. So if you're on Rakshasa extensively, you get to stand this unit. So really, if you're just keeping this card on the board, whenever you retire, it'll always just get called back to the back row at rest. But then if you pay the soul, it'll stand no matter where it is on the board, just so long as it's in the back row, but it can be any of the 3 back row spots. So good card for that, just for the versatility of keeping it alive and be able to use it as a booster again after it's retired. But then additionally, it has the secondary effect, which is just a continuous if you have a Vanguard in the Malworm state. So if you're on Rakshasa, this unit gets 5,000 power. So it also is a 13k booster. So again, just like with the Glaive Dragon, the 13 number is really good because it's making your Shurs and your Boulder Axes hitting for good numbers, hitting for like 23s, 28s, 33s, 38s, depending on Persona right or not. So 13k boosters are always strong. You don't necessarily want your whole back row to be this card. Hence why I'm only there's a lot of 3 of in this deck right now, just because 4 for a lot of your cards just feels you start to get a little too clunky. You're getting flooded with them. That way you don't need a lot of these cards. You only really want to see 1, maybe 2 of them on the board at any given time. So that's why we're running reduced copies of them. But 3 feels good. You'll find it. Sure enough, draw power. 1 card we are running a 4 of though, just because it's very important. You need to make sure you see it. Is this boy, our friend from set 2. So what he says is very important, which the first is this was placed on rearguard if you Vanguard with grade 3 or greater with Varga in its name. Your opponent's rearguards cannot intercept. That's really like the whole reason you're running this, because one of the big problems Varga had originally was that your opponents would just intercept their front row away before Varga attacked, in which case the board up is effectively meaningless. Then they got some shield and guarding out of it too. So this shut that off. No more intercepts for you. Your rearguards just got to sit there in the front row until they die. So a very good card just for that effect. But then additionally, it has the secondary effect. That is when any player's rearguard in the same column as this unit is retired from the rearguard during your turn, and you have a grade 3 or greater with Varga in its name, you retire this unit to draw a card. So just more draw engine. Good way to free up your board before Varga wipes it out, and it nets you a card back into your hand. This is one of your main targets also for Shura. For Shura's effect to be able to, when something's retired, put it back into your hand. You target this a lot of the time because you want to keep recycling that no intercept skill. And you run on 4 of this just because you really want to make sure you see it. Yes, playing more than 1 in a turn is definitely not going to do you any favors, but just the need to see it ASAP is that important that you run for. If you want to cut this down, you can. I don't really know what is more important. Like, I guess you could maybe bump Shura or the Energy Cycler back up. But again, you're really fighting for those resources on the Counterblast and Energy Blast side. So I prefer the 3. I think this was the one. Because it's free and doesn't cost any of those effects for its skill, I like the 4. Next, I am running 2 copies of the new generic from set 5. The grade 3 searcher that searches specifically for a different name than your Vanguard, which is why this card is not very good. But in this deck, that's very important because it lets you search for the new Rakshasa while you're on your grade 3 turn on the old Varga. So if you watch my Odium video, you know what that skill entails. It's the same effect in the sense that you have to discard this card from hand and remove 2 of your ride line cards from your soul or the drop back to the ride line, similar to the cats from set 12. You check top 7, look for a grade 3 with a different name, put it into your hand. If you whiff that skill, you put this back into your hand, but you don't get the ride line cards back, which feels bad. And then it also has some additional shield. In this card's case, it's just if you have more rearguards than your opponent, this unit gets 5,000 power. And then wait, that's not right. Sorry. It's if your opponent's drop zone has 4 more cards. This card gets 5,000 shield, so it's a 10k shield. That's a very easy condition to fulfill in this deck, particularly with Varga's Retire effect. And then against G-Zone decks, you can remove a grade 3 from your soul or drop from the game, and this gets another 10,000 shield. So it's a 20k shield essentially against the Stride decks, and then it's a 10k shield in basically any other situation. So that part's nice. 10k shields are 10k shields in the grade 1 lineup, but really it's here to make just really try and find this since you don't really have another way of finding these cards and putting them into your hand. You want to run 2 of this. So 2 copies. And then the other 2 of I'm running is 2 copies of the Impale Horn Dragon. I'm still running 2 copies of this card because I think it's still a really good booster for Varga specifically. This was another set 1 Divine Skill card. For anyone who doesn't know, it's the special booster all the Divine units got. So it's a 13k booster so long as you're on Varga. And then if he's boosting Varga specifically, it's a 15k booster. So it makes really good numbers with Varga. And then its second effect is at the end of the battle, it boosted Varga. You Soul Blast 1, retire, draw. So this kind of can combo well with Storm Chaser, in the sense that you have this originally behind your Vanguard with Varga. You swing, you boost in that first battle, retire, draw. This gets retired off Varga's effect, and then you call it to the center back row, Soul Blast 1, stand it, swing with it. So great way to just keep up the back row boosters for Varga. You used to not have that, and you'd only have like 1 attack where you could boost with this, and then you get retired and drawed. Now you can have 2 boosters for Varga, which can be nice. So that's why I like running both. 2 of, just because you have to be careful with your setup with Storm Chaser, and they are competing a little bit with that spot. But so long as you're just planning out your attacks right, you can use both. That's why you don't really want more than 2 of these, because it's not really doing anything anywhere else. You really just want to make sure you have it behind your Vanguard. Lastly, of course, is our Perfect Guards, which as always is your 3 Nation. 1 Sanctitude, 1 or less card in hand. You don't discard for Perfect Guard. Your opponent has the text Triple Drive. You don't discard for Perfect Guard, and then this gets around your guard restricts from hand because it's not going to the Guardian Circle. It's going to the Order Zone. We all know it. We all love it. Good cards are good. Triggers. Thing has not changed is we are doing 8 crit. We're a restanding Vanguard deck with potentially 3 Vanguard swings. You want to run 8 crit. Go to soul crit is like fine. You don't necessarily need it. Occasionally you could maybe run out of soul, and I guess it could kind of help if you really want to make sure you have the soul for either Impale Dragon or Storm Chaser. But most of the time you want to just save the 50k shield. So if you don't have these, you can just run generics. It's fine. But definitely run the 8 crit. For the off trigger, I am going back and forth on this even as I am recording. I am running draws for now. Because obviously your front row gets obliterated depending on what is in it, and so you're not really getting much value out of checking fronts. And unlike in Odium, like we were talking about before, where in Odium you will at least always have 1 rearguard circle open, so the fronts still feel somewhat relevant. In this deck, there will be times when you are swinging with Varga and you will have nothing else in your front row, in which case fronts feel effectively useless if you check them offensively. And so draws feel better in that sense, because at least you're drawing an extra card when you check it. Now, with that being said, I am still very much a proponent of fronts on the defense side because of that 20k shield. And as we talked about with Odium, we just keep getting more and more of these decks like this deck, like Odium, like Destinkin, like Fading King. They're just hitting such big numbers that the 20k shields feel really impactful in keeping you alive. Where the draws, you have them in your hand, they're 10k shield only. It feels pretty bad. There's definitely been a couple games I've played with Rakshasa so far where I've lost because I had this as a 10k shield in my hand and not a 20k front. So as I'm going back and forth, it really depends on what you're thinking about. Offensively, funnily enough, these are better just because it's giving you more value on your drive check with Varga, but defensively speaking, in your hand, fronts are 10 times better for the extra shield value. So weigh what matters more to you. Obviously, if you check these defensively, you get the draw, so that matters too. But I don't know, the 20k field just feels very important right now. So I'm gonna keep thinking about it and decide. But draws for now. Heal triggers, it is exactly the same as it's been for a bit, as we just did with Odium. 2 generic heals, 1 each of the crit and the restand. The meta is just full of everything right now. I would always recommend right now in set 5 meta having 1 each of the crit and the restand. You have a good amount of both in the meta, but you also have some decks like Faded King and Shoujo Doji that don't have any restanders or any crits. They're just doing other things for their multi-attacks. So I definitely highly recommend just 2 generics for right now. When the Stride deck sets come out in a month, I maybe would put in one of the Stride crits, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know about that. I think the generics are still maybe just better just to cover all your bases. Especially because Harry and Night Rose are less impactful in set 5 meta than they would have been in set 4 meta when they were supposed to come out. But that's a rant for another day. But I think this is definitely the good lineup. At least 2 generics, I think, is the right way to go. Just to always have a 15k shield. Overt Trigger reveal. To surprise nobody, it is still blue. You're a deck that is still swinging with a Vanguard 3 times, so you want a Overt Trigger that can take advantage of that. And for those who don't know, the blue Overt Trigger gives you a crit for the rest of that battle. Or for the rest of the that turn, excuse me. It's essentially a 9th crit trigger that you can put anywhere, and so you just throw it on Varga, and Varga is now swinging for a crit, probably 100 million, 3 times. That's very strong. Within the blue also have a second effect, which is very good in this deck, which is to take a card from your drop zone, put it back into your hand. Varga's obviously retiring all of your stuff every turn. You're going to build up a lot of pieces in your drop zone. So this is a good way of getting some of those important things like Shura back. Also, not for nothing, getting stuff like Perfect Guards back from your drop zone or Persona Rides can also be very good too. Now, I will say the purple Overt Trigger is a close second. And if you don't have the blue, but you have the purple, I highly, highly recommend you run the purple. Being able to call a rear guard during the battle phase is very strong in Varga because you're, again, always going to have probably at least 1 rear guard circle open, if not both. So purple is very impactful there, and then also getting stuff from the damage can be very good too. So purple is very strong on this deck. I think blue is better just for the crit pressure. It's not like Odium where I would put the Dark States and the purple together as relatively on the same level. In Odium, here I think blue is distinctly better than purple, but purple is still a good alternative at second. And that's Varga. Yeah, I mean, no one playing competitive Vanguard right now should know or be surprised about the fact that this deck is very strong. 3 Vanguard swings, this is still 3 Vanguard swings. It's just easier to pull off now, and you wipe your opponent's board every turn. So it's strong. I don't know what else to say about that. It's very good. The deck's still, as an Overlord fan, fun to play, and I'm going to be using it a lot on the channel, so look forward to that. If you guys have questions or concerns, let me know, and otherwise we'll see you guys soon. Bye.